Now I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of perfect squares. So just in the previous video, I talked about 9 being a perfect square because 3 times 3 equals 9. So now I want to talk about expressions that are perfect squares. So for instance, if I had an x to the 4th, that would be a perfect square because it's x squared times x squared. Now remember, when it's a perfect square, those numbers or expressions I'm multiplying together have to be the same. If they're not the same, then it's not a perfect square. If I can't find two factors that are the same, that give me that number. So now, if I think of this, how do I want to say this? Here it is. This here is a perfect square. Now this is harder to tell. This is really x plus 3 times x plus 3. So the idea here is this here is a perfect square. Now if I multiply this out, I'm just going to show you that's going to give me the x squared, and then plus 3x plus 3x plus 9. Then if I put my two middle terms together, I'm going to get 2x squared plus 6x plus 9. So we can see that it works. Okay, and that's what I wanted you to see here. So now that you see that it works, let's try to come up with these on our own. Now, what I mean by that is, let me give you something like x squared plus 4x. Now, what am I going to add to this so that it's a perfect square trinomial? So that's the idea here. So if I think about the reasoning that I did for the last one here, that was x plus 3 times x plus 3. Notice here, when I times my two last, I got a 9. So now, whatever that is, when I times them together, I got to figure out what that constant's going to be here. So now, let's see how those middle terms work now. Okay, so that's the one thing. When I times them together, I have to get the perfect square. Okay, now, when I'm trying to figure out this middle number, those are going to have to be the same that I add together. So if you look at this one here, those are going to end up being 3x's, which makes sense. When I add two 3x's together, I'm going to get 6x. And when I times 3 times 3, that's going to give me 9. So it kind of makes sense what I should get for that, sort of. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there. So now for this one, notice I want this middle to be a 4x. So what does that mean? That means this is going to have to be a 2x, and that's going to have to be a 2x. Okay? And that was a 3x and a 3x. And what did I do with those 3's eventually? To get the last number, I had to multiply them. So this is really going to be 2x, or not 2x, because remember, there's no x for just a constant. So it's just going to be 2 times 2. So really, for this to be a perfect square trinomial, I'm going to get 4x plus 4. Okay. So let's try another one now. So that would actually do it for us. This is actually going to be x plus 2 times x plus 2. So I'm going to give you a more difficult one now. What if I said x squared plus 18x? And what am I going to have to add to this one? Now again, I kind of think of that same idea. I know this one here, that this is going to have to be 9x and 9x, right? And then I'm going to have to multiply 9 times 9, so I'm going to get 81 here. Because remember, those two middle terms, when I add them together, are going to have to give me the 6x. When I take those coefficients and I multiply them, that's going to give me the constant. Okay, so this one here is no different. So when I take, when I add this 9x and 9x, I should get 18x. And then when I take this 9 times 9 here, I should get 81, and that's going to be the number that I have. That's a perfect square. All right, so there it is. Just the idea of perfect square. But to simplify this just a little bit more, so now let's say I had x squared plus 26x, or let's do a minus 26x. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to make it a minus. And then let's see what I have to add. So a nicer way to think of this, because remember this is a doubling thing going on for these, is I'm just going to take half of this 26. Because really that's what I'm doing here. What's half of 18? 9. What's half of 4? 2. What's half of 6? 3. So that's where those numbers are coming from. So if I'm going to take half of b, that's going to be 13. So I'll take half of b, which is negative 13, and square it, right? Because remember, I'm going to times it by itself to get the 9, or times it by itself to get the 4, or times it by itself to get the, 81. Okay, so that's the idea. So I'm going to square that. So 13 squared is 169. So I'm going to have to add 169 to this to make it a perfect square trinomial. And when I factor this, the factors of this are going to be x minus 13 and x minus 13. And I pick minus because notice this is a negative here. Since I have that negative and I'm adding them together, then they're going to have to both be negative. And that's why we see negative 13 or negative 13. All right. Perfect squares.